Hello, Thomas. Hello, everybody. We're here at the third Rethink Festival. I'm Guido Romeo, and in the image next to me, you find Thomas Prehn. This is the third edition of the festival, but it's the first edition online. Of course, we had to rearrange this, reorganize for the COVID pandemic. So this is a new format for all of us. This is, I must say, made possible by a great team that never surrendered to anything and has been working a lot since basically January to reinvent this format. Um, I also should point out this is our first live session because the festival started yesterday and tonight and for the next 3 nights until Saturday. You will be joining us in live sessions here and on pre-recorded sessions from 12:30 in the morning. So it will be almost as in the festival in Milan, of course. We'll miss on all the networking and all the cocktails we usually have, but this is definitely an interesting formula. And while I'm welcoming Thomas Prehn, Thomas, most of you guys must have read about him or already know him. He's one of the most renowned strategists and organizational transformers. He will be talking about many things today, about uh, perpetual betas, skateboards, the death of statistics, in short, building a culture of innovation, basically. And just a few uh, household information before I leave the floor to you, Thomas. Um, this is an online format, but it's designed to be a very interactive format. So you guys watching us on YouTube can interact with us through the YouTube chat. If you're watching us on Facebook, you can write us on the Facebook chat. If you're on the festival page, on the Fuori Salone TV page, you can write questions to us through that chat. Your questions will be grouped and I will see them on a separate screen and we will try to convey them to Thomas and have a lively discussion after his keynote. I think I said almost all the things that I was supposed to. I should absolutely thank the people making this possible, Stefano Maffei and all his team from the POLI.design, who is behind all of this, and of course PwC, the main sponsor supporting us throughout this week. Thomas, please, on to you. Take it away.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. Good evening from Copenhagen. And thank you, Guido. I'm going to share my screen here for you to see the keynote. Is it as it should be? Yes? Hope so.
Yes, it's good.
All right, perfect. So yeah, today or tonight, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how to build a culture of innovation. I promised Guido that I would be no longer than 10 to 12 minutes. And it's a fairly complex topic. Innovation by itself, building a culture in itself, and combining the two, very, very difficult. So I will I'll just touch upon briefly on some of the learnings that I've done throughout my years as working with culture and innovation in both public organization, private organization, non-governmental organizations, and then hopefully we can have a lively discussions afterwards. All right, let's do it. So I can't even remember when I heard the word innovation at the first time, but it was definitely way after I graduated from university. At that point, there was no such thing as innovation, but now it's like it's all over the place. We hear word as being agile and being innovative, and I think one of the reasons for this is that it's really about not just especially in these times, I think that we have an idea that the world is changing, but it's really the nature of change that is changing. You really see um, that the pace is picking up of change. So the change that you have the idea that everything is changing even faster than we are used to. You have the complexity of the change because everything is getting more and more intervened. So the complexity will rise, and then you have this fuzziness and fast pace, and those two combined actually leaves no time for strategizing, or at least very little time, and also preparing for what should be your next product, your next service, the next um organizational change that you want to build. So being more or less prepared for the unknown and being able to maneuver within this unpredictable future that we're looking. It's not even the future; it's the everyday that we're looking into is almost unpredictable. We've just seen this 3 months ago. So change is changing, and it's not just the world. One of the reasons why change is difficult is that typically in organizations we have a very set tradition on how to approach projects or problems or challenges. And it's somewhat like this curve or two curves that I've drawn here. So one of them, the one starting at the top, ending at the very bottom, is the impact of decisions. So that, in the very beginning, the decisions that you make would have a very decisive impact on where you would actually end up in your decision process. If it's a product, if you can go with, should we do uh, a totally strategy shift in customers, or in should we go digital instead of analog? Those are big questions. Whereas at the very end, you can do, does it has to be red or white or whatever? The thing is that that's merely a problem because you are not really knowing all the challenges of the problem that you're solving in the very beginning. And that's why you have the learning curve. And this is, of course, this is an abstract way of drawing projects, the process of projects. But I think that we can all agree that we always, at the very end of a project, we know more about the challenges that we have engaged with and also the solutions. But we might have made some decisions along the way that are barriers to actually getting to what we learned along the way. So the real issue here, the real problem is that we're we are not really capable on a traditional basis to lean into a learning organization. So how do we overcome this dilemma of projects that we are making the decisions blindfolded? So in practice, you would need to do your decisions later in the process, and you would have to have a very steep learning curve. So the one that we just saw, the learning curve that we just saw, that would be based on a reactive approach to learning. We will learn along the way when we engage challenges or problems with the solution or the policy that we are making or introducing. And here, what you see now is a steep learning curve that is proactive. And you also see that we are postponing the decisions. So we are actually letting ourselves being able to learn before we make the decisions. There's a lot of issues by implementing this in organizations, but I won't get into that one though. The idea is that you should test your hypothesis, and you should do this through, for instance, experiments. So an experiment is a vehicle to learn, and through the experiment, and actually by doing, you would see that you would both have a progress of impact and decisions, and also have a very steep learning curve. So the idea of saying that innovation is a methodology that you can approach like this, or it's a process, or even a physical space. I know that you probably, that we are in the audience, we would have people that have built a physical lab somewhere in their organization, and where they can put up post-its and hang big white papers that, or even brown papers they can draw on and do all this design thinking process. But it's not really about that. It's really getting the innovation into the organizational DNA. And to do this, you have to embrace innovation as a mindset, as a culture that you have in your organization. So really, it's about seeing innovation not as methodology, processes, a physical space, but as a learning process. It's really about how do you create within your organization a process of learning, or a mindset of learning, or even a learning organization. And to put it simply, but also in an abstract way, it's really about, do you have an organization that is capable of being in perpetual beta, being always working with prototypes, not really having neither the organization nor the policies or products or whatever you work with to have them set in stone, to have the experimental mindset where you're using on one side the sense making, on the other side the thinking, the perception. So it's really about introducing into your way of doing work, into your processes, but most of all into your culture, empathy, the process of exploration, working with hypotheses and experiments, prototypes, and from those you can start the more thinking part of your process or your culture, doing extractions of what worked best, what were the enabling conditions for our policy, or how we implemented it, and then empower whatever you extract, and then put it back into the experiment for you again to apply empathy, exploration, extract, and empower. So it's almost like an infinite loop of learning. And right there in the center, you would actually find the experiment. So it's really about working with the prototypes as a vehicle of learning. So to turn this quite abstract figure into something that hopefully would be more easy to understand, I would try to show you a small video of what the experimental mindset looks like in practice, like in practical. So yeah, maybe we should just run the video, and then I'll do some talking within the video. Can we see the video, please?
The boys, man. Next fucking try. Here Here it is, next try. I'm sick of fucking just doing this, guys.
All right, that was the skateboarder.
Yeah,
So-
the skateboard has been crashing for all this time. It's pretty hilarious. You kind of feel bad for the guy, but I'm sort of getting your point.
So the idea is that we really want to embrace the innovation. We ask of our employees and our organizations to be creative and innovative and take chances and work with risk. But when you ask of all this, you're also asking for people to fail. So really embracing the idea that a failure is not something that you will not have in your organization, but looking at all the attempts that the skateboard is doing as a learning experience. So it's really about, you have the imagination, you have the self-efficacy, but then you also have the idea of trying, adjusting until success. So he will continue try over and over and over again, 17 times, I believe. At one point, I think actually twice, he says, that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. But he then continues. Eventually, sliding down the pavement, he goes, that's it. I got it. And it's the same within an organization. You have to build up this organizational muscle memory. The only way that you can have this way of an experimental mindset is to allow your organization to experiment, really experiment, and not look at all the attempts that are not successful as failures, but as learning experiences, where you, as an organization, you will adjust your speed or the height of the ollie, or how you would put your weight on one foot before you go down, and really step by step learning what would be the right application of my product or policy or whatever that is that you're building. So this is why the skateboarder is a very great example of what will be the experimental culture in real life. So, and why, I think I need to skip a bit faster here. So why are we looking at culture? Why is it interesting? It's because, as you probably heard 100 times before, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So the idea of changing culture is that if you can really change the culture, it will stick and it will eat strategy for breakfast. So that's why when I've been working in organizations in all kinds of sectors, working with the culture has been the primarily tactic, because I knew that this would be the enabling conditions to truly build a learning organization. And this slide here just shows that there's, you can work with culture in different arenas. And the farther you go to the right, and the farther you go to the top of this diagram, the more difficult it will be. So I'm just going to finish up with one very concrete example from MindLab, where I was director. And so we had a lot of ways of working with the culture, but one of the platforms that we work with was something that we call Project X. The Project X was an idea that you could build interventions that would push for a new culture. And this specific picture that we have here is an advent calendar. This is what we do for Christmas for our kids. They will open a door every day and it will have chocolate. And if it's the cheesy one, it will just be a picture. But every day they open up, they look forward for next day, open up, there will be a picture of chocolate. And it's the same idea here. So what we did was that in the Ministry of Industry, Business and Financial Affairs, there was a strategy that we needed to be more agile. And when we asked people, and especially the leadership and the management, what does being agile, what does that mean? how would that translate into everyday behavior? They were not really certain what they meant. So what we did was this advent calendar, and we printed one for every person in the entire ministry. And we even did I think 6 different versions, so everyone would have a different one, and or at least a neighbor would. And behind every door, we had a very specific assignment that you had to do during the day. So the assignment would be, and this is the 3 pillars of culture. So the assignment would be a specific behavior, an action, something you had to do. That's pillar 1. It would introduce a new vocabulary. So it would be new words that would be introduced to your organization. And it was the 3rd pillar is the artifact. So the advent calendar itself would be an artifact. So these 3 pillars, and this was actually what the Project X was about, was to introduce in various ways the 3 pillars to push a new culture through behavior, vocabulary, and artifacts. And we would target the enabling conditions of the organizations to build an innovative culture. And then finally, if there are any leadership out there or management, you have to walk the walk. You cannot just say that we are innovative or we have to be agile. We have to be experimental, have an experimental DNA. It's really about being the culture that you want to see in your organization. And then you have to hope for followership. Because as Zach Exley say, the revolution will not be staffed. And I think that's the final slide. And if that should be it, as you see, this is me coming to work in the ministry, not talking about skateboarding, but actually doing skateboarding myself.
Thank you, Thomas. So it's you need a skateboard to change the world. I mean, that's an interesting point. But we have a few questions coming in. I mean, I have quite a few from myself, but I'll go with the ones coming from the audience here. And I think the first one is very much on point because, I mean, those 17 crashes, those crashes hurt a damn lot. And when you scale it up to an organizational dimension, I mean, not all CEOs and all managers want to have their team crash 17 times. So the question here from one of our listeners is about sense-making experiments and experimental mindset. So you brought the Advent calendar, which is a pretty harmless prototype, but what other kind of prototypes can you imagine? Because I mean, at the very beginning, when you're getting on that skateboard the first time, you want to have a sort of a controlled environment, right? You don't want to really break your nose the first time.
No, I think so. Of course, you can scale both the complexity and the risk of your experiment. And I would definitely suggest that you do small experiments within your capability, but also pushing the idea of what you believe that you are capable of. Of course, when you look at the skateboarder, and this is a very figurative way of introducing experiments, but when you look at the skateboarder, the crashes seem like they hurt a lot. And I can tell you, it does hurt to skateboard and to learn and to evolve as a skateboarder. But it doesn't have to be that that harsh on the organization, because prototypes and experiments, they can be everything from if you're, for instance, if you're an agency within a ministry, addressing your potential citizens with something that you've done with drawings, or introducing something on post-its, or doing a mock-up, or whatever you might be, that's not a crash, but it's more a learning experiment where you would then have some feedback to your experiment that you can then either address by putting it into your policy or your implementation of policy, or you can discard it because you've learned from experience, or that it doesn't fit the policy or the politics of the ministry, that it can be in the policy. So for me, it's it's not as harsh as skateboarding, but it's more the idea that you're not capable of doing a silver bullet in first try. So it's lowering the risk, but also lowering the cost. And I think in the projects of dilemma, where you have the learning curve and the impact of decisions, you would also find at the very end, changing decisions is very expensive. So it's also a trade-off. If you're not willing to test in the very beginning, if you're not willing to experiment, it's going to be super expensive to changing in the very end. And we know, even you can be in politics, or you can be in private sector, or even in an NGO, changing something that is super expensive would be a no. And then you would just go with something that is not really the best way of approaching your clients, customers, citizens, or whoever.
Yeah, so I get it. It's a gradual process. It's a gradual transformation. And I think you didn't mention this, but I think it involves a great degree of, how would you say, of honesty, of transparency. I mean, you really have to be honest about the expectations. So I would imagine that if, as a public institution, as a ministry, you did an experiment like that, you would have to declare it's an experiment. So accept, make it clear that you might just crash it. I mean, just people might not respond to it, and in that way you make it easier on yourself. But also, I have another of our friends here asking me about, this is an interesting one, about the use of empathy to leverage innovation. Empathy is something I think that relates strongly to what you were saying about culture. And so, do you have any examples about using empathy to introduce innovation, to leverage innovation?
Yeah, it's so when in MindLab, most of the people that were in MindLab were sociologists or anthropologists, or design service designers and stuff like that. And they were really, their approach to designing or working with citizens is about understanding. It's not really about promoting something, but really listening or observation, understanding the true nature of both, the behavior that we are that we're intervening, and the real challenge that we're intervening. And I think that you have I actually have a different slide that I didn't bring along today, where you have the experimental mindset, but you could apply that typically on most traditional organizations, public sector, and also businesses, where you would, instead of empathy, you would work with presumptions. You would have an idea that you would then proclaim and implement into your organization. So really being mindful that you are truly listening and bringing empathy into the work that you're doing. I think that's super important. But that's also, if we go back to the risk and the managing of expectations, it leaves you with the opportunity to solve the best problem, but it leaves you also with the risk of that you have to do something that was not really called for. And if I could just tie a small knot to that. So when in MindLab, we actually, even though I prefer the word yes, we said no a lot, but we said no, because they would approach MindLab saying, oh, we need this kind of service or this kind of policy because we've decided on that. And we would say, we are not doing that because there's not the data or the evidence that this is the best idea or the best approach. But we will help you if you want to bring that, the hypothesis to the end user, the citizen, for instance, in order to learn if it's right or wrong. And then we will provide you with, the best problem to solve.
Thank you, Thomas. There are a couple more questions. One, I think, is very, again, this one is, well, you guys are all asking very good questions here. This is very much on point with the present situation, I think, with the Italian and European, and it's about small and medium enterprises, because along the example of the ministry, and I understand. My lab has worked with a lot of larger companies which have like been thinking about innovation and have a considerable amount of resources to put in the game. But small and medium enterprises are not always. They might be more agile, more driven, but they have another set of issues there. I guess there's budget, there's smaller staff. They can't really do a pilot because it's all one thing. It's a small boat.
Mm. So I would disagree.
Great.
I think the larger the organization, the more it tends to be a very hierarchical and a hardcore structure approach, whereas in small enterprises you would be much more agile, and it would be so the hierarchy is more flat, and actually getting that sense of urgency of bringing innovation in as a mindset. I think that is easier, and the younger the company, the more it will be part of the DNA, and then it's more about keeping it, I think. But I also think that, so one of the things that we did, and we did this for a smaller agency in one of the ministries in Denmark. So they had at some point we did a reform in for unemployment, and it didn't really work as it should. And then we were brought in actually after they had a fast working task force looking into the problem. It took them 10 months, and then the problem wasn't really either figured out, addressed, or solved. And I said that we can do that in 10 days. But we will also provide you not just a problem, but also a second generation prototype. But I need 5 of your people that's responsible for the reform, and I'll bring in 2 of my people. And at that point, that was really like the skateboarder. We have never done policy work in 10 days before. So nobody thought it was possible. We didn't even have a clue how to do it. But the thing is that we merely just put the people together, and the idea that it was possible brought so much energy into the process that they actually succeeded. And then people said, well, you were also working 7 people full time for 10 days. That's actually a lot of days. And in that case, it might be just as expensive as the, as the long process. And then I just showed them actually a video of a very old pit stop from Formula One, where one guy is spending about 6 minutes to change the tire. And then I showed them a recent one where I think about 20 people spent 1.5 seconds to change the tires. And yes, there are more people, but you benefit from all these people's perspectives. And 20 times 1 second is only 20 seconds. It's not 6 minutes. And you also would have the solution, the go-to-market solution. You would have that way before the 6 minute has gone. So there are so many benefits of working with a lot of people for very intense periods. And it might seem expensive, but it's not when you calculate in all the benefits.
Yeah, but it takes a great deal of skills, because I saw those. We have a racetrack here in Monza, which is pretty famous, and it's just incredible to see those guys do the tire switching, and it's they're super fast. I think our time is up.
Memory.
Yeah, it takes a lot of training of all the team all together to do it, and it's very packed. It's a very packed and a very tense time. We still have a few minutes, and one thing I wanted to ask you, and which came up in our discussions, in our preparation discussions, is about the external factors. I mean, we went through this huge stress test the COVID pandemic. I mean, we went through it, all of us in different ways. Different countries had it different. You in Denmark seem to have managed much better than we have in Italy, but again, Italy is very diverse, and we're seeing the United States, which is a totally different game, and Brazil. So, but what we see in Italy is that this stress test has sort of increase the demand for innovation, for change, because like one thing that I have observed is that until last year everybody was like, yeah, well, digital virtual is nice, but it's like a nice thing to have. Now everybody's talking about bandwidth, access to the digital. It's like there's a popular demand for this, and this is just a starting point because everybody wants digital services, things that personally, as an innovation journalist, I've been writing about in the last 20 years, but it was like a small group of people, of evangelists that were pushing this. Now it's a large social request. So I wanted to pick your brain about the how the external context can sort of boost the demand for change, and how you can manage this, because it's not all, it can not eventually be always positive.
I think that ties back to the very beginning where I said that so yes, I think the COVID-19 is a very practical example of that you cannot foresee changes, and the complexity and the scope of the changes can of course vary, and COVID-19 is just, it's like it's super extreme. But what I think what we have seen on the top and on the back of COVID-19 is that you've seen a lot of the need for resilience. And I think that we have been witnessing the biggest experiment ever in both resilience, in risk management, but also in transformation leadership. Because this is really about bringing a large group of people that are uncertain, and that are for where their daily, their every day is just torn apart, to bring them through on the other side. So I think in terms of transformation leadership, it's been a very interesting thing to look at from an innovation perspective. I think it just underlines the need that you need to be prepared in a different way that you were 20 years ago or even 5 years ago. We've been talking about exponential technologies and globalization and global business models and global tech companies and stuff like that. And yes, they have been kind of in the periphery, and we've looked at them and thought, maybe it won't change our business, but before you know it, it did. And then, as the old saying says, if it's, if it ain't broke, why fix it? But I'll just add to that, if it is broke, it's too late to fix it. So you need to be much more on the forefront of your own change, and you need to be able to, on a daily basis, design, what kind of organization would you be, and what kind of value proposition do you offer as a business or as a public organization.
Thank you, Thomas. So our time is up. We have just a few seconds. I would like to thank you. It's been lots of fun to have you online, as it is, and hope to see you again next year in Milan. And thanking you, I would like to remind everybody that tomorrow on the same channel we will have Jua Lepanen with us at 6:30 p.m. So please join us again, and you can also, of course, explore the channel starting from 12:30 with all the other content. And this content will be recorded, and you will be able to view it again. Thank you, Thomas. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.